say you're a W-2 worker, you're an employee, you have a W-2 from a US company. Your US company does not care where you work. You could literally leave the US for 330 full days in a 12-month period. And then that means you can exclude up to $126,500 US dollars from US taxation. So effectively, you could pay no income tax.
Have you ever wanted to avoid paying US taxes? Legally, that is. Well, in this episode, we'll discuss exactly that and more. Today, we're joined by Nathalie Goldstein, the founder and CEO of My Expat Taxes, and she's here to break it all down for us. Now, you might be thinking, how interesting can taxes be? But trust me, this conversation is anything but boring. Nathalie brings clarity and insight to a subject most of us dread. She even shows us how, if you schedule your travel correctly, you can avoid paying almost all US taxes. She explains how US citizens living abroad can stay compliant without overpaying, sheds light on little-known tax benefits and deductions, also walks us through what entrepreneurs and digital nomads need to know if they want to make a life outside the US. Whether you're already living overseas or just dreaming about it, this episode is packed with valuable information you won't want to miss.
Welcome to the podcast, Nathalie. We are so excited to have you on here to talk all things international taxes.
Of course. I'm happy to be here. I hope nobody leaves because that sounds boring. I promise to try to make it as interesting as I possibly can, even though it is obviously taxes.
Well, actually, I mean, already the enthusiasm that you bring, just that introduction, I think people will stay around a little bit. So,
absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, and I'm so excited for you to distill it all out to us because you are the creator of My Expat Taxes. So tell us, what personal experiences led you to build this company?
Yeah, well, I'm the expat. I'm the expat that needed the tax software to do my own US taxes. I moved in 2015. So I'm from California. I moved to Austria. I think expats normally move for one of two reasons, either love or for work. I ended up moving for love, but also relocating with my job. So also for work. So it was a 2-in-1. And I got abroad. I went to Austria. Could not speak German, got my German loans, that was like a pay slip, was like, I don't know how to deal with Austrian taxes. And then I got reminded that I still have to file a US tax return. So basically stress. And I remember asking my international company at the time, right, billion-dollar international tech company, please help me with my US taxes. I'm sure you have other employees are like me, US citizens that work outside of the US. And they said, nope. Can't help you, but here is a contact to the Big Four. That's it. Don't talk to us anymore. And then I emailed the Big Four, and they were like, "Okay, it's going to be like $2,000 to start." I'm like, "Well, I'm not really paid that well to pay you $2,000 to start." So I looked for the next best thing on Google. What is available? The very popular tax softwares. Just I could not use them. They asked me 5 times within the first few minutes if I lived abroad. And I was like, yes, I live in Austria. Just help me. And then I remember I ended up settling on a boutique tax firm or like a tax firm that said they specialize in expat taxes. Long story short, I got like notices that were like rerouted from Australia to Austria, like literally on the envelope, it's like crossed out Australia and rewritten Austria. And I was like, okay, I think there's a little bit of improvement that we can do here. And basically, long story short is, we jump into trying to create My Expat Taxes. The original goal was just to create a software that could help, the simple folks out. And then as we started helping out people with salary, we had people that were self-employed. We had people that had companies. We had people that had foreign pensions and investments. And then now, we're the leading tax software for Americans living abroad. We're, looking to be the leading tax software to help anyone with any type of international income, really. So even if you're living in the US and you just have international income, you can still use My Expat Taxes. If you're not a US citizen, but you somehow have US source income, you can still use us. So we're really trying to be that one-stop shop for those that, you realize that you can tap into different markets and you can work in different places and you can have bank accounts in different countries. And that's not going to make your tax situation a nightmare. And we'll help you, simplify it.
So they were going, I love, that's like the old Dumb and Dumber joke.
Yeah, the Australia to Austria.
I can't believe it actually happened.
Bobby.
Yeah. It really did. I have that envelope somewhere. It's been so long, but it's really like someone at the post office crossed it out. It was like not Vienna, Australia, but Vienna, Austria.
That's amazing.
Oh my goodness. So from when you moved over to Austria to when you quit your job that brought you over, how long was that?
Let's see. So I moved over in 2015. I started with my expat taxes at the end of 2017. My official last day at my job was in 2019. So it did take a little bit, but like in that time, I had an educational leave. Basically, being in a big tech company, they have rolling layoffs. So I think we are already pretty much hit with the layoff, but it just took a lot of time to implement. So I saw the writing on the wall for a very long time, and that's kind of what prompted us to create my expat taxes. But it did take a little while before, it really kind of went into effect. And I think, yeah, my last day was around like February 2019 or something.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so when you moved to Austria, you moved directly to Vienna?
Not directly to Vienna. I moved to a smaller town close to Nauburg. And they don't speak English there really. I still remember one of my first days, my husband, he had to go to work and I'm there and I'm working, but I'm working from home because you can just work from home. And I go to the local grocery store. I my credit cards are not working. I don't have any euros. I only have USD. I just want to buy lunch and I cannot speak German and I try to pay and I can't pay and I show them the USD I have and they're like, well, that's not what we take here in Klosterneuburg in Austria. And I was just like, in tears, like, what am I doing here? Why? But so no, I didn't move to Vienna first. It took a little while. I definitely had to figure out how to navigate in anyone that knows Klosterneuburg, it's a very nice city, just not super international. But yeah, that's my answer to that one.
I mean, I feel like I'm curious because a lot of people who are listening are either have moved or are very curious about moving. Are there any other times during this transition where you're just like, I don't know if this is for me?
Oh, I mean, honestly, I still have those days when it's between January 2nd to basically the end of March. Today's okay because there's sun, but like it's so gray here in Austria. Like especially like mid-February, I normally have to take a trip to California or Vietnam because I'm literally like I cannot do this. I cannot wake up one more day and look at this gray weather. Like I need some sunshine. Christmas is fine because it's beautiful in Europe, but like the minute after New Year's, you're like, why am I here? It's cold and it's gray. So I still question it, but obviously not in the way I used to. Back then it was very difficult, just the language and not quite sure if, I would make it and all the opportunities that I felt like I was missing out on just because I'm from Silicon Valley and to see all my friends, obviously in those big startups progressing in their own roles and then me feeling, okay, I'm in corporate, I'm starting my own thing, but obviously it takes a while before that becomes successful.
Yeah.
That's such a journey, such a big journey. So I think one thing that I want to talk about is this idea. We get a lot of feedback online that, I don't want to move abroad because I don't want to pay double taxes. And so I would love if you could just give an overview of tax treaties. And I know it's different in every country, but if you could just share some light on tax treaties.
Of course, and a spoiler, even though each tax treaty is technically different, if you are a US citizen, I would not rely so much on a tax treaty because if we look at the tax treaties, they're not actually made for US citizens. They're made generally for non-US citizens, which is kind of funny, but basically in every tax treaty, there's something called a savings clause. And it says if you're a US citizen, you can't use 99.9% of this tax treaty. So that makes it a lot easier to digest because the tax treaties are effectively kind of useless, except for 2 or 3 main clauses you'll find in a lot of the different countries. So the first one being that there should be relief from double taxation. So that effectively means that you can claim foreign tax credits. So that is what's going to prevent you from being double taxed. And I think to kind of backtrack a little bit is what does double taxation really mean? Yes, if you're a US citizen and you move abroad, you will most likely have to file your tax return in 2 different countries. But will you actually be double taxed? Because being double taxed means that you actually have to pay tax on the same amount of income twice. And effectively, that should not happen because you can claim foreign tax credits. So the tax treaties will help to say, yes, you can claim foreign tax credits. There should be relief from double taxation. The other part it will normally help with is if you have any type of social security or state funded benefits, which you don't normally pay income taxes on because they're from the government. That it will normally say, okay, even as a US citizen, you can use this clause, and it will say if either the paying or the country you reside in will tax that income. So normally only one country will be able to tax some type of state or social security benefits. And then, you know, in some specific countries, it gets a little bit deeper with pensions, but I don't go there. But the main thing is it's actually very rare to be double taxed. You do have to file, and I can understand that that is annoying, and there are fees associated to filing, although we try to make it as affordable as possible with my expat taxes. But to actually pay double taxation, it rarely happens, right? Of course, if you live in a country like Singapore and the income tax rate is a lot lower than what you would pay in the US, definitely expect if you're a high earner earning over, 130K, you're going to end up paying a little bit to the US, but it would have been the same basically if you live in the US and you're not paying double taxes because you get a credit for what you pay in Singapore, and then you just pay the access to the US on what they would have charged. But if you live in a high income tax country like Germany, you're almost never going to pay the US anything. I mean, it can happen, double taxation in a few, rare scenarios, but generally it shouldn't happen.
Is it possible to answer this? So for someone who's curious about moving to Europe, and I know each country is different, would they likely pay more or less taxes moving to Europe?
Most likely more. But it also depends because, so yes, Austria, Germany, they definitely have higher income tax rates than US at the federal level. However, their tax rate will then combine in state taxes for the most part. And so if you're living in US, in California, there's not that big of a difference because California is like 10% on top, right? But if you live in the US, in Texas, and there's no income tax, then yeah, you're definitely going to end up paying more in Europe. But if you live in California or New York, it's probably not going to be a big difference. And the thing too is you see a lot more from the income tax you pay. And again, I guess this is subjective and where you go, but it is always interesting to me, in Austria with like the public transport, you can take all the public transport in Vienna for €1 a day. You can buy a year card and it's 365 euros for all public transport within Vienna. And I can't think of any deal you could get like that in in the US anywhere. Um, you know, Property taxes, electricity bills, all of that are just so much lower. And so again, I guess I'll get into a debate, but yes, you generally pay more income tax, obviously depending on the country, but you have to factor in that if you're in the US, there are also high income tax states. And so that will make a difference a lot less. And, you could of course move to Switzerland where there's not that much income tax actually. It's lower. So there are countries in Europe like Estonia, Switzerland, stuff like that.
Oh, see, that's good to know. I think that's good to point out.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that most people would probably say, oh, you're going to pay more. And in general, probably about the same. I mean, if you live in certain areas. So
Right. And then there's social services that come into play as well. And
There really are. I mean, for health service, it still shocks me every time I go to a doctor and then they give me some prescription, right? Some medicine I have to get. And I go to the pharmacy here and then I get it and they're like, okay, €5. I'm like, what?
I can remember when our daughter was sick in France and she had a ear infection. And we had to call, and they're like, we can send a doctor to your apartment, but it's going to be very expensive. And we're like, oh, my God, what's it going to be? And, we're thinking like hundreds of euros. And they're like, it'll probably be like 90 euros. We're like, wait, the doctor's going to come here and treat our daughter or treat our daughter for 90 euros? Like, yes, please, we'll take
sounds
care of
good.
that. Yeah.
Let's do it.
It's like, I'll take it.
Yeah.
I remember I went from a master's, I did a private university here, and they were like, it's really expensive. It's like, 2,000 euros for like the whole thing. And I'm like, do you need a tip?
No, we don't tip here.
This is crazy. But anyways, I do think that, if you just look at an income tax discussion, of course, yes, in Europe, you generally pay more. But if you look at like the life quality, obviously only from my perspective, but it's so much more affordable to live here. And you really don't have to stress about things like health insurance, or what happens if you get sick, and what happens if you get pregnant and you have to have a baby, or stuff like that.
Are there any pitfalls that someone who has moved and they're doing the taxes for the first time, or you're moving abroad, like what are the concerns or red flags that you've seen people fall into besides not using my expat taxes?
The first one is, if you use a traditional US-based tax software, I'm not going to name them, but the big ones. If you use your family CPA that doesn't know anything about international taxes, couple common things are going to be, first, not reporting employer pensions. So if you do have employer pension, like a supplemental pension, the contributions that your employer makes that pension is actually not deferred, and it's seen as taxable compensation in addition to your salary. So people will generally miss that. They can miss filing the FBAR, which is the report on foreign bank and financial accounts. And that can be really scary because technically there's a $10,000 penalty. Although the IRS doesn't enforce it, and I haven't seen it enforced, you don't want to be in this, potentially you could be getting a bill of thousands of dollars. Another one is people that they want to contribute to their U.S. individual retirement account, the IRA, and then they don't realize that when you're abroad, if you're using, say the Foreign Earned Income Exclusion, one of the expat tax benefits, you could actually eliminate your ability to contribute, and then you have like access contributions. So there's quite a lot I can keep naming off, but the main thing is it comes down to, you want to definitely use a service that understands more about being an expat and the forms that are required, because there's a lot of high penalty forms that are involved, especially if you do things like you have foreign pensions, or you have, foreign investments or foreign companies that you set up. That can be definitely a lot trickier. And then the other part too is just optimization wise. If you use the normal tax softwares, they'll probably use the most basic expat tax benefit, which is this foreign earned income exclusion, where you're excluding over 120K of foreign earned income from your US tax return. And that sounds great. However, if you had kids under the age of 17 with a valid US Social Security number, and you're living in a higher income tax country, that's actually working against you, because if you were to use the foreign tax credit approach instead, you could actually be getting a refund of, for the tax year 2024, $1,700 per child. Even if you pay no US tax, you can still get these refunds. And so that is what my expat taxes really tries to optimize in, is to say, okay, based on your unique situation, this is the best approach for you to take, not just to get you to zero taxes owed, but to see if you actually get a refund as well.
Wow.
And one thing I want to just reiterate and have the expert mention is that if you are a US citizen and you move abroad, no matter where you move, you still have to file US taxes. Is that correct?
Yes, if you meet the filing thresholds, you still have to file US taxes. And I just warn that if you move for love, right, and then you marry someone that's not a US citizen, and obviously they probably don't want to be on your US tax return. I know my husband has no interest in reporting his income to the IRS. But you probably end up having to file as married filing separately. And that filing threshold is $5. And it's been $5 since 2018. So if you're in that situation and you can't file under a different filing status, you have to file a tax return if your bank interest is over $5. If it's so low. So basically you're kind of stuck filing. And even if you don't have to file, if you meet the thresholds for the FBAR, you still have to do that, right? So it can get kind of tricky. And generally, it's if you work abroad, if you earn money abroad, or if you're married to a non-US citizen, you probably have to file your US taxes.
Yes, I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about. So I know that's like probably expat tax 101, but I think it's important to call out.
We have a lot of questions that people wrote in.
Yes.
And probably too many to get to. Where should we start? What
Well,
was
let's
the
see.
very specific one? I think was the FBAR one. I was trying to find that one.
Well, with the German question.
Yeah, let's go with that one.
Yeah. So this is from a German an American expat living in Germany,
James.
James. And his question is, what are ways to reduce tax obligations past the fee, the foreign earned income exclusion?
So you can use foreign tax credits. So basically, if you're a higher earner in Germany, right? So if you're earning over 130K or so, then you kind of max out your foreign earned income exclusion benefit, because that for 2024 is $126,500 plus some for housing deductions and exclusions. But basically, in Germany, you would probably look at the foreign tax credit instead because you're paying such a high income tax rate in Germany. In Germany, also specific to that is you have a couple more benefits just because there are a lot of Americans in Germany. So the tax treaty is a little bit friendlier, where you could actually defer employer pension contributions. That's one of the 5 countries where you can do that. I'm trying to think of other specific German things, but it mostly comes down to foreign tax credits because you just pay so much income tax in Germany that you shouldn't end up having to pay anything at the federal level.
Oh, okay, great.
Someone asked, what do American children under 18 who live in Europe have to do for taxes, if anything?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily about age that makes you have to file a US tax return. It's about if you meet the filing thresholds. The only thing that is specific to children, that is if you can be claimed as a dependent on another US tax return, then you have to watch out for your unearned income. So if that person has over $1,300 about starting for tax year 2024 of unearned income, so that's interest or capital gains or dividends, right? So not salary, not self-employment, then the person that is claiming them as dependent potentially has to report their income, or they potentially have to file their own tax return even if they don't meet the normal filing thresholds. Otherwise, it's really about if you meet the filing thresholds, then you have to file a US tax return. If they have accounts, right, if your parents open accounts for children, they might be on the hook to file their own FBAR. So even if you report all of their accounts on your FBAR, if they meet the FBAR filing thresholds, which is a combined maximum balance of over 10,000 US dollars in any year, they also have to file their own FBAR.
Okay.
I know a lot of information.
Yeah,
It
no,
is,
no.
but
I mean,
it's all
it's
important.
very good. I think a lot of people will. I mean, I kind of see this as it's very specific. You know, this isn't something that someone's like, oh, I'm driving to work and I really want to learn about taxes. I kind of see this more as like someone who's curious, and that's what we've seen. I mean, we've seen a lot of people who are very intrigued, and as we moved to France, then moved back, like hearing that process, hearing everything. People who have done it, they wanted to hear how we were doing it. People who are curious, and so I mean, I see a lot of people will get some value out of this.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to dual citizenship, if someone is a dual citizen, American and say Italian, like myself, and then living in Europe, how do they deal with inheritance tax?
Yes, so the US doesn't charge inheritance tax, actually. What the US does is basically the person that gives the inheritance, they are the ones that are responsible for filing a gift tax return or a state tax return. You, as a receiver of an inheritance, you don't necessarily have to do anything unless you have over 100,000 US dollars from a non-US citizen. If that's the case, you do definitely have to do something. You have to disclose your gift on Form 3520. And if you don't disclose your gift in a timely manner, then that is unfortunately an automatic $10,000 penalty. So that is one of the forms that the IRS is super serious about. So again, generally nothing unless you get over 100,000 from a non-US citizen. I can't speak on Italian or in Italy what they would do with inheritance tax, but the US does not charge it. I would say a lot of people wonder what happens with dual citizenship, right? How that affects things. It honestly doesn't affect really anything except for Italy. Italy is very unique in the way that they handle things. So Italy is pretty much the only country that if you are a dual citizen, things do change. So if you are, I get off the topic now of inheritance, but for example, if you're self-employed in Italy and you're not an Italian citizen, then you would pay still into the US self-employment system and social security system. But if you're a dual citizen, you could actually pay into the Italian. And then there's a couple other, little perks that if you're a dual Italian citizen that you have kind of more tax rights, so to say, in Italy. But that's very specific to that country. No other country kind of gives dual citizens extra benefits. So you pick the one interesting country.
Thank you, family.
Yeah.
Although we're living in the U.S., so.
Yeah.
A lot of the questions we've kind of answered, which are basically about double taxation. But someone asked, do other countries challenge U.S. tax credits?
Not necessarily. You can claim U.S. tax credits on a foreign tax return, so that's very common. It's just normally going to come down to who has a taxing right. So if you are a resident in Germany, generally they have kind of first taxing rights on your salary, especially if it's, a German salary. But of course, if you have US rental income, then the US would generally have first taxing rights because that's sourced then in the US, and then you could claim any of your income taxes paid in the US on your German tax return. So most countries, because of the tax treaties, there's a way to do it both ways. It's just that obviously if you're a resident and you're actually living in a country, normally what you'll do is you'll file that tax return first, and then you would claim foreign tax credits on the US tax return side. It's I would say it's generally the easier approach, and it's the more standard because the US makes it quite easy to claim foreign tax credits. But of course, if you had some type of US source income like US rental income, it would make sense that you're claiming US income taxes on, your foreign tax return.
Okay.
Okay. And then what about, since digital nomad visas are so popular right now in countries like Spain, how would a U.S. citizen pay taxes if they were a digital nomad?
Yeah, so if you're a digital nomad, if you are self-employed, then the first thing is you probably have to file a Schedule C, right? Assuming you don't have an S corp or you don't have some company set up, but you're a freelancer. So you would have Schedule C on your tax return. Now, the big question is, are you subject to US self-employment tax? Because that is 15.3% of your net profit. It's not a joke. The benefit is if you pay self-employment tax, you actually add to your Social Security benefits account, so you can draw technically more Social Security benefits later on. So it's not lost money, but it's obviously not fun to pay in that year. Now, if you're in Spain and you're actually registered as a resident because you have a proper visa and you're paying income taxes in Spain, then you could claim potentially a totalization treaty to say, hey, no, I'm paying into Spain's system and not to the US. Most digital nomads won't do that. And so you generally end up still paying the US self-employment tax. And again, if you're a really digital nomad and you're kind of jumping around and you don't have a country that you're anchoring to, and you don't really have a residency in any country, then you're probably looking at using the foreign earned income exclusion. And that is a little bit trickier because you're not a bona fide resident. So you have to watch your US travel. So you basically have to make sure that you don't go to the US enough. Otherwise, you'd be on the hook to pay, US tax on all your worldwide income. And that is 330 full days outside of the US for a 12-month period, consecutive 12-month period that can start or end in the year. So it's not that you have to be from January 1st to December 31st, 330 full days outside the US, but it could be, okay, maybe from March to the next March, or even from, June to the next June. So there's flexibility, but there is more planning involved if you're a digital nomad. So don't fly back to the US too often is what I'm saying.
Can you? I think you were just answering that, but I was curious about, and I don't know what's called, but basically, if you do stay out of the States for so much, I think you were saying that right there. What is that called, and what is the benefit? Like, if you move to the Netherlands, and you wanted to avoid, like, how can you avoid more taxes by not coming back to the U.S.?
Yeah. So if you move, I would say if you move and you're not kind of living in a different country, because you're really living in the Netherlands, you're paying Netherlands income tax. So I don't know if you'll get the benefit you're looking for, but if you're jumping around and you're not paying income tax to a different country, so say you're a W-2 worker, you're an employee, you have a W-2 from a US company, your US company does not care where you work. You could literally leave the US for 330 full days in a 12-month period, and then that means you can exclude up to $126,500 from US taxation. So effectively, you could pay no income tax, period, right? And this is if you pass the physical presence test on Form 2555 Foreign Earned Income Exclusion. So this is, again, if you're not a resident somewhere, you're not paying income taxes. This just means you have to leave the US and its territories, and you have to be really outside the US. You can return, but again, you have to be 330 full days for a 12-month period outside the US. And that can start or end in the tax year. So it's a little bit more flexible, but definitely planning is involved. And basically on My EXPAT Taxes, what we'll do is we'll ask you for your travel dates, when you moved abroad, things like that. And we'll actually look to calculate the 12-month period that works best for your situation. And then that might even result in people are filing their tax return now. And we say, hey, if you stay abroad, for 3 more months, you don't go back to the US, we can use the foreign earned income exclusion for your 2024 tax return and exclude this much from US taxation. And so there's definitely optimization and planning involved, but this is possible, right? That you're a W-2 worker, you're remote, and then you just leave the US. Obviously, you then have all the expenses of living, all over the world, but
So
that would be a possibility.
So hypothetically speaking, if you set up a company, a U.S. citizen sets up a company in the United States, and you are then an employee of that company, you employ yourself
Yeah.
and move abroad, and you stay out for 330 plus days, you would be able to not be taxed on that first 120 something thousand of income.
Yes, on your salary. Obviously on the company side, you probably have to file a corporate tax return, so I can't comment on that. But as a W-2 worker, if you stay abroad for 330 days, you can use the foreign earned income exclusion and exclude that from U.S. taxation.
If you were to build a plan, either, I guess the two things, because the one that you just brought up, I didn't realize that would save people the most on taxes. What country would that be? Or would it be just the nomadic life? Or I guess the first question, what country would you save the most taxes in?
I mean, there are countries that don't have income tax. Like in the Middle East, there's a lot of countries that don't have income tax, right? You could move to countries with lower income. Singapore doesn't have a very high income tax rate. Hong Kong doesn't have a very high income tax rate. So there's definitely a lot of countries that you could pick based on their income tax rates. I'm not going to recommend anything in Europe for the most part. Maybe Estonia, but still, it's still not that low. But yeah, that is an option. So you can obviously move to a low income tax country, and generally then probably the cost of living may also be lower. Otherwise, if you're nomadic and you stay outside, that's also a way, because then you're not paying income tax to anyone, right? Because technically the US, I mean, how legal is that, I guess, in the whole scheme of should you really be going to different countries on a tourist visa and then working there? But this is, I think everyone knows this gray area that kind of happens of just opening up your laptop anywhere and working.
I know that when we took our, what ended up being an 18-month trip around the world, we kind of realized we heard about this like too late. And we were like, oh, we shouldn't have gone back to the U.S. Like during our travels, we had gone back for like 2 weeks.
You have to stay out. Yeah.
And we were like, man, if we would have done that, I think we could have avoided a huge amount of taxes.
We might have even been out of the States enough, but I'm not sure if our American CPA was fully versed in that.
What year was this?
We left in 2015, and then we stayed out almost all of 2016.
Okay, no, you have the statute of limitations to amend a tax return to get a refund is only 3 years. So at this point, you can only go back to 2021 to make any changes. I do a PSA there. If there's anyone listening that's like, oh, I didn't file a 2021 tax return, or I don't file taxes even though I'm abroad, just keep in mind that if you file your 2021 tax return because of the statute of limitations on refunds, you could technically still get those stimulus payments, which is $1,400 as a refund. But you have to do it technically by June 15th, but I'm going to recommend April 15th just because we all know the IRS is pretty understaffed right now. So just if you haven't filed that 2021 tax return and you're listening to this, please file it. The IRS is waiting to give you that $1,400.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
That's a good point.
What would you say is the most expensive country in terms of taxes to move to as a U.S. citizen?
I mean, I'm biased, but anywhere in Europe, honestly. But you see a lot for your tax. It's hard to say. I mean, even if you think about in Switzerland, even though they have a lower income tax rate, you have very high cost of living there, but you get a high salary. But then it works in reverse because you pay less income tax and then you get a high salary. You might max out on the foreign earned income exclusion, so you end up still paying some to the US. So yeah, I'm not going to really recommend anywhere in Europe, but it's nice life quality.
Yes.
I'll recommend that.
Well, with the
I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for,
yeah,
but
I mean, with the cost of living in Switzerland, it sounds like it would make sense to be working for a Swiss company and maybe not working for a U.S. company unless you're a high earner.
yeah, probably. I don't think that would be generally recommended.
What
It's a pretty high cost of living there.
What do you think taxes say about a country's values?
I think, I mean, now this is my own opinion and I speculate, right? So just disclaimer out there. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's like a shared pool of money, right? And so technically what that should be is that this money that you give should be helping to contribute to the public services and to help people around you. And I get it. I get in the US that, you know, people aren't necessarily willing to that. And I understand too, you don't necessarily want to pay more because maybe someone else is paying less and then you feel that they're using your money. But there's a very much a big difference, right? Like if in Austria we pay more, and I can only speak for Austria and how I see it, but you obviously pay more income taxes. But like I said, the public transport, it's clean, it's affordable. Your health insurance is covered. No matter if you're a high earner or you're not, you have the same affordable health insurance. When you're walking around, you feel safe because there's not such a difference between the income levels of everyone. And, you know, the way I see it too is if you live in kind of countries like Europe or so, maybe you don't want to live in this like roller coaster type of life where it's like you can get rich one day and then go bankrupt the next, like the US. I know that very well from Silicon Valley, that literally one day you can be rich and the very next day you can be bankrupt. But in Europe, it's a lot more steady. So it's not this roller coaster life. And if you're looking for the roller coaster life and you're looking to get rich and you're looking that like, I want to be, IPO, super rich, next tech founder, probably Austria is not the place for you. But if you are happy to have like a nice, stable life and work within those realms, then I think Europe is nice. And you kind of see that with the way tax is treated, right? Just because obviously if you are a higher earner in these countries, then you will pay quite a bit of tax.
How do you find yourself fitting in, as this successful entrepreneur with a tech background in Austria? Like, do you feel like a square peg in a round hole?
I mean, not, how do I say this? I have a very interesting life here because yes, obviously there's my EXPAT Taxes and I'm very proud of that company. But when it's all said and done at the end of the workday, I go to the country. I live on the countryside. I have my 2 kids and I hang out with the parents that are, of the other kids in the kindergarten. We don't talk about my company or anything. So I think in Silicon Valley, there's really this huge rat race of like, okay, I have this and I have this net worth and I have this success and this is my resume and this is what I've done. You rarely really talk about that type of stuff here, at least in my bubble. And there's obviously a lot of, pockets for entrepreneurship and startups. I actually kind of stay away from those. I used to go to a lot more networking events back then, but maybe that's why I left Silicon Valley, because it's not really my cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we see that, in our travels and everything we do is you have this, I think it was like Tim Ferriss talked about, it's like a coat of armor that's on, and we naturally just want to like drive, run, like it's being like tough and driven. And it's like that coat is easy to put on. It's hard to take it off. But actually when you do take it off, when you slow down and just enjoy life, kids kind of force you to do that. And you kind of
have no choice.
You have no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you start to appreciate some of the small things, some little things. And it's like, having, we were able to all sit down for breakfast for a little bit and like have fun. And she's coloring, telling stories. And then, then she's running away. It's like, hey, come back for breakfast. And, all that stuff, like enjoying the little things it's nice to like be able to do that. It's nice to be able to go to the park and not just be like, oh, what do you do? So it's,
that question, I think, in general, is not asked in terms of what do you do for a living in Europe as much, at least in our experience, versus here in the States. I feel like that's one of the first questions that people ask. Even if you're on vacation somewhere, what do you do? It's like, I need to qualify you. Have you noticed that in Austria?
Yeah. It's, people rarely ask. I think it took quite a long time for most of the parents of my daughter's friends to kind of realize that I have a company and all of that. And I know there's a balance, right? So it's one is sometimes I miss it, but other times it's nice that it's not my whole identity. And I guess I have a nice little piece, like a little corner, so to say, of my world where it's just I get to do this really cool stuff and I get to help people and I get to work with all these American expats all over the world, right? No matter where you live, and I get to solve these problems and jump into it, but I get to also close my laptop. And I think that you kind of need that to have this balance, because in Silicon Valley I didn't have the balance where I felt like it was just work and I could not close my laptop, and even if I closed my laptop I would still have to talk about work with the laptop closed. And then of course at the other side is, if I didn't have this and I lived in Austria and I didn't have my company, I might probably be bored, to be honest. So it's always nice if you have a contrasting kind of experience. So it's not all or nothing, but every day I get a little bit of something and then I feel balanced. And I'm very thankful for that.
Well, it sounds like you're able to curate the life that you wanted in the place that you wanted, and that's such a gift.
Except for the months of January through March. 'Cause I do not want to be here because it's right now is okay. But when it's gray in February, I don't want to be here. But I will accept that for the rest of the months. But I think you might know from France in winter months it's not fun.
And in New Jersey.
And
where
Chicago, where I used to live.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I'm from California. This is completely
Right.
new to me. This is like, what do you mean winter lasts for like 6 months?
So as a mother of two with a successful business living in Austria, who, I mean, really, it seems like you're living your dream. Was there any part during this journey where you just felt like it wasn't going to work out, be it the company or the move or anything?
I mean, I think there's always moments. You're always up and down, right? You see social media, all of that. It's always the highlights. I think in general, when you think about your daily life, every single day you have to make the choices to make you happy. It's not that you hit something and you're successful and then you're just happy. There's no such thing as you just hit happy and you wake up and you have the freedom to do the things you want to do. And I think that, at least for me, that's what brings happiness. And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. Sometimes April 15th, I'm just doing tax cases all day. I'm not necessarily the happiest person in the world, but I'm also happy I can help people that are stressed out during that time. Pros and cons. And then, I mean, with the company, I guess 2020 was obviously tough for everyone, right, with COVID, but the company was growing, it was COVID, I had my first baby, I didn't know how the future of, me working would be. So that was pretty crazy, but, as we do, we'll always make it through, right? And you just continue on.
Have you always had this mindset, or is this something you built over time?
I think I've always had this mindset because my parents generally have always had this mindset. I mean, my parents, nothing I go through will ever compare to what my parents went through, right? Obviously, they were in Vietnam. They left at a terrible time. They were forced to leave their home. And so if they're happy and they can wake up every day and do the things that they do to, be successful, I never really saw me to have a reason to, feel that I couldn't do the things I wanted to do, because I already have so much, such a great foundation to go on. I was born in California. I got a great education. I had my parents' financial support. So I had a platform to go for, and not everyone has that. So I'm just grateful that I got to go there and I got to, continue from there. Right.
Wow. Very well said.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Do you think Austria, I know it's hard to say if you'll be somewhere forever, but do you think it's your home for a long time, or at least?
Oh, yeah, I'm probably going to retire here. I think I'll live here forever. Honestly, we have a house. I'm on the countryside. Like I said, I've got the 2 kids. I don't think I will want to live here all 365 days because, like I said, I don't want to be here during February. So I definitely think I'll find a way to stay in California for, quite a good amount of time in the year, probably head over to Vietnam or somewhere else that's warm. So I'm just trying to follow the sun. Other than that, I love Austria, right? It's a nice place. And like I said, my little my little chunk of the world it's very nice, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, great. Well, I think you've answered all the questions that we've had, at least a lot of our viewer questions. Did we miss any?
No, I think that really was wonderful, and I think it'll answer so many people's questions. And if they have more questions or want to learn more about you in general, what's the best way to find you on the internet and social media?
myexpattaxes.com. There's only one, myexpattaxes.com. You can always email us at team@myexpattaxes.com. You can, message us on Instagram. You can join our Facebook groups. If you want to talk to us, you will find a way to talk to us. You can ask us all your questions. We're always going to look to answer them. We don't, in this world of AI, I just want to say we really try always a human response, always that we're actually there to help you, because there's nothing more frustrating than being stressed and then having some type of AI response to it. It's like, not helpful, especially with tax, which is obviously on the internet, a lot of very conflicting information. And that's obviously what AI is built off of, just stuff on the internet. So we are here to help you. We understand I'm in your situation. So team@myexpattaxes.com is the email. myexpattaxes.com, you can just create an account. And again, I get that filing taxes is stressful. Even if you just live in the US, it's probably stressful. But what I want to say is, if you are a US citizen and you are living abroad, you have a chance to invest in the US market, right? You have a chance that your neighbors don't necessarily have. And I think that through your US tax returns, there's a lot of things you could do. You could continue to contribute to your individual retirement accounts. You could look to continue to contribute to US Social Security benefits. You could look to invest in US, stocks or anything like that. So there's actually a lot of stuff you could do in terms of financial planning. And I encourage people that, look at your US tax return not as a burden, but another financial tool in your, tool belt, so to say. And again, if you haven't filed a 2021 tax return, the money is there waiting for you. You just have to file that tax return, and we're happy to help you with that. If you have children under the age of 17 with a Social Security number and you live abroad and you're paying a lot of income taxes where you live, you probably are due a refund as well. And so look at that and see if it's worth it to file, and hopefully My Expat Taxes will make it an easier filing experience.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram and TikTok. These are great free ways to support this podcast. Also, please subscribe to this podcast on both Spotify and Apple. On both of those platforms, you can leave us up to a 5-star review, which would help us out greatly. Please also check out the sponsors mentioned in today's episode. That's the best way to support this show. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please put those in the comment sections in YouTube. And yes, we do read all the comments.